Before I begin the video, a little bit of shameless self-promotion. I have a second channel called Vars 2, I know, creative name, which will host all of my non-League of Legends discussion content, so if you want to check it out, it would be very much appreciated. Currently, I have Genshin Impact videos, but I'll be soon going into Smash Bros content and maybe some other games in the future. But let's get back to the video. Hey guys, welcome back to another rankings video. It's been a while since my last one, I think over a month and a half ago. I know a good number of you were expecting the next episode to come out already, because I teased the runes tier list since way back in August, but as you know, Pre-Season 12 introduced a new rune called First Strike, replacing Prototype Omnistone for the Inspiration Tree. Let's face it though, I doubt any of us remember Omnistone even existed to begin with. Glacial Augment and Lethal Tempo were also getting changed, so I decided to put off ranking runes until those changes were implemented, and now they have. Today we're going to have a little bit of fun by making a tier list for runes based on their design, how much they influence a champion's gameplay, and how well. At least, I wish I could rank every rune. Okay, so the thumbnail for this video was made a long time ago, like back in the summer, and it was just sitting in my folder the entire time. I was originally planning to cover all 63 runes on video, but now that I'm getting around to doing it, that's gonna take a while. So here's what I'm gonna do instead. To save time, I'm gonna verbally rank just the Keystone Runes because there are 17 of them, which will hopefully be no more than like 15 to 17 minutes. And then at the end, I'll show you where I rank the basic runes by making a separate tier list on screen. In a similar fashion to the Mythics video, I'm ranking the Keystone Runes not on power or popularity alone. Rather, I want to judge their design based on how well they enhance or improve a champion's overall experience in the game. More importantly, I want to measure how much they tax your skill expression. I'm aware most runes are passive components and therefore it's kind of hard to add too much skill expression, but even so, comparatively speaking, I think I can still make it work. Lastly, as per usual, this video is purely subjective and not meant to be taken as fact, so please don't be offended if I rank something higher than you think should be lower, or vice versa. Now let's get started. Down in D tier, I have only 2 runes. It would have been 3 if we still had Omnistone, but that's gone now. First, we have Grasp of the Undying. On paper, it might not seem like half bad of a keystone. Tanks are naturally pretty hard to kill and will be in combat for a long time. Therefore, they can reliably get several empowered attacks in a fight. The bonus damage scaling off your maximum health means by the late game, it's not uncommon for tanks to do 100 bonus damage with each proc. Here's the problem, it doesn't really do anything for anyone. Grasp of the Undying is the rune tanks take when Aftershock or Guardian are not good choices. The fact that it has to be activated through a basic attack means it's much more effective on champions who can get one in very easily, like Camille, Gangplank, Gnar, sometimes Teemo. The rest take it because there's nothing else better on them. The bonus health incentive doesn't change anything either. Unless you're having wet noodle fights between like a Sion and Tahm Kench, you're only getting about 50 to 100 bonus health in an average match. Overall, Grasp is taken by tanks who don't have any other good rune, and abused by bruisers and ranged champions who can apply it more freely. It doesn't exactly represent the values of a tank, other than scaling off your maximum health. The second rune in D tier is Unsealed Spellbook, which shares the same main problem as Grasp. Having access to virtually every summoner spell in the game may seem potentially game-changing, but it's such a gimmicky concept that more often than not, it's inconsistent, which is why there's not a single champion in League of Legends who consistently runs Spellbook. And don't say Twisted Fate or Nasus, it's situational even for them too. Is Spellbook ranked D tier because it's not picked often? No, but much like Prototype Omnistone, what prevents it from ever being good is that there's no circumstance in which it would be a better choice over any other rune. Grasp of the Undying struggles to fit into any playstyle, but at least it brings consistent pressure in the laning phase to warrant being picked on any champion who can trade with their opponent. Spellbook doesn't. You have no idea when you're gonna need heal or barrier or exhaust or ignite, etc. You may even need it multiple times but don't get to do so. Champions take summoner spells that are the most beneficial when facing the enemy team, exhaust against assassins or cleanse against Leona, things like that. I can't think of a single game where you would need one of every spell while restricting repeated use of a single one. Moving on into the C tier, we have Guardian, the defensive tank rune of the Resolve tree. It's not half bad of a rune and is well enjoyed by supports who have to deal with heavy lane pressure or divers. The only grievance I have with it is its activation requirement. Simply standing next to an ally or using a supportive buff on them grants you a free potential shield. It doesn't even require timing or anything because it activates on its own. So while it does allow for moments where you can save a teammate from death, the way you get the shield is a little too easy. Guardian does have a definitive purpose as the anti-burst rune, so it's a staple rune for just about any protective support like Rakan or Taric. I just wish there was a more creative or skill-expressive way to have it activated. Speaking of Rakan, it would be cool to see Guardian function like Gleaming Quill, where upon landing an ability on an ally or champion, a few seconds later it grants a shield to yourself and up to 2 allies in your circle. By the way, I should mention, the general rule of C tier runes for me is that they're okay, but fall short for one reason or another. Up next is Summon Aerie, designed to be a hybrid between damage and defense. It's usually taken on champions who can easily apply damage to their opponent and utility effects on their allies, usually boiling down to just enchanters. It doesn't do much otherwise though, just extra damage when you deal damage and extra defense when you support. Though unlike Guardian, I don't think there's really any way to make this better because I know it's supposed to resemble Lulu's Picks, a little pet that helps you out a bit. It's kinda cool how Aerie has a distance mechanic to her. The farther her tag champion is from you, the longer it takes for her to return to you, and vice versa. If you're closer, she returns faster so she can be used again. But I highly doubt anyone pays much attention to it, and they simply just take Aerie for a bonus to their normal gameplay. Fleet Footwork has always been that one rune in the precision tree you take to survive laning phase or to deal with enemy comps with a lot of harass damage, and a lot of its balancing problems were a result of it being too good for lane sustain. Kassadin, Nasus, usually a melee champion who want to stay healthy early game. Sounds a lot like Grasp of the Undying, doesn't it? The reason Footwork is up in C tier versus D is mostly because of how the buff is used. Unlike Grasp, if you want to maximize Footwork's efficiency, you can't indiscriminately use it whenever because you get much less healing on minions. That and the movement speed buff can come in handy for chasing down or running away from opponents. So there is some semblance of skill expression for this rune. That being said, not enough to move it any higher than C. Fleet Footwork was the spiritual successor to Warlord's Bloodlust, which went through several different iterations. I personally really enjoyed the second version, where basic attacks gain bonus lifesteal based on your missing health. That put in a bit more flavor because you would heal more the weaker you were, but the weaker you were, the more at risk you were of dying. It would have been a good option to pick on champions who get stronger at lower health, like Mundo or Olaf, and not just a free healing rune. So, on to Conqueror. Oh boy, what a balance nightmare this rune is. And do you know why? Because it is the most all-purpose rune in the game. Basically, if your champion wants to deal damage, they can go Conqueror, bonus attack damage or ability power, and Omnivamp just by using attacks and abilities. It's no surprise why this rune keeps getting nerfed and reworked over and over again. Performance-wise, it's one of the best runes in the game, and a lot of fighters and slayers rely on it for that extra bit of DPS and sustain. But given the ones I've gone over so far, you can probably guess I'm not a fan of Jack-of-all-trades runes, and like I said, Conqueror is the most all-purpose rune in the game. You can't go wrong with it, and I hate that even though I play a lot of champions who take Conqueror. This rune was a spiritual successor to Fervor of Battle, where basic attacks will grant you bonus attack damage per stack. That rune was fine despite giving up to 64 bonus AD, because it was only good on champions who can auto attack a lot and it only gave damage, it didn't sustain. Conqueror builds on attacks and abilities, alongside giving damage and sustain. That's why very few people took Lethal Tempo, Fleet Footwork, and Press the Attack. Runes should not be all-purpose. In my opinion, they should have a niche. The last rune to go into C tier is the newly added First Strike. In case you don't know what it does yet, basically if you manage to attack an enemy champion first, for the next 3 seconds you deal 10% bonus damage and get bonus gold equal to that damage, or 70% of it if you're ranged. But if you're damaged first, the rune instantly goes on cooldown. In other words, if you land the First Strike, you get a damage buff and bonus gold after that buff wears off. At a glance, I like the premise. It rewards you for attacking faster than your opponent can. But here's the problem. The two types of champions most likely to land a first hit are assassins and ranged champions, since the former can strike very quickly and the latter can stay far away so as not to accidentally get hit. Originally, it was intended for just assassins, but assassins don't care about the bonus gold. They need damage, they need Dark Harvest or Electrocute. That leaves just ranged champions, and guess what rune caused a mountain of problems to the point where it had to get removed for the same reason? Kleptomancy. What do they have in common? Free gold. First Strike is taken on champions like Gangplank, Victor, Ezreal, and Jace because they're able to land the First Strike with their range attacks much more safely, which leads to degenerate gameplay where whoever has First Strike can coast through laning phase without actually having to interact with their opponent. I don't think they thought this one through very well. Moving on into B tier, these are the runes that are in the middle. Not great, not bad, just more or less decent choices with no major upside or downsides to either. First is Electrocute. Land 3 separate attacks or abilities on a champion and you get bonus damage. Simple, but it gets the job done. It's fantastic for those who specialize in bursts like assassins or quick trades like mages. I don't really have much else to say about it to be honest, but I'm glad they clarified that it had to be 3 separate attacks because the problem with Thunderlord's Decree back in the day was that it also worked off multiple instance damage attacks like Rumble's Q, Morgana W, etc., which technically don't count as damage over time. Press the Attack bears resemblance to Electrocute where it's a 3-hit passive rune. For this one though, you can only use basic attacks to proc it. Press the Attack is in B tier for the same reasons as Electrocute. Good on marksmen and champions that can get 3 hits in very quickly and want to make use of the bonus damage afterwards. Some say it's a pretty cheesy rune on certain champs like Urgot and Renekton who gets 3 shots in very quickly, but it's not inherently overpowered to the point where it warrants a nerf. PTA and Electrocute may be seen as too similar, and you might be right on that. It just comes down to whether or not you want to go down the Precision tree or the Domination tree. Next, we have Dark Harvest, a very snowbally rune. I would put this rune in A tier because it has an actual gimmick tied to it that incentivizes a playstyle, but it's mostly just Electrocute with a different condition. Assassins often swap between the two depending on how confident they feel. If the enemy team has a lot of squishy champions you can easily pick off, probably make better use of Dark Harvest. If the enemy team has more durable types like fighters, then Electrocute might be able to bring that extra oomph. You can just pick your poison, give or take. Last one in this tier is Arcane Common. I rank this one higher than Summon Airy mostly because it's an actual projectile that can be avoided and isn't guaranteed damage. That doesn't mean you should disregard it though, because it hurts quite a bit in the late game. And I also like how the cooldown decreases the more skill shots you land, so if you're consistently accurate with your hits, you get more uses of Arcane Common. Overall, it's a solid keystone for mages with long range or skill shots. And now we move on to A tier. These are runes that actually influence or alter your playstyle to reasonable success. Let's start with Hail of Blades, a front-loaded attack speed steroid, making it so you can get 3 hits in very quickly, and it synergizes extremely well with any champion that wants to burst you down through auto-attack centric abilities. For example, Xin Zhao and Tristana have abilities that need to get auto-attacks in very fast. Even though they come with their own attack speed steroids, this augments them even further. A quirky gimmick, but it does work rather well. Lethal Tempo just got reworked to where it's like Conqueror, except instead of adaptive force and lifesteal, you get attack speed and range. Hail of Blades favors champions who need front-loaded speed, while Lethal Tempo is better on champions that want to scrap for a while. Jax, Tryndamere, Warwick, Jinx, these champions hack away at you until you die or they do. This is a much better version of the rune than the old one, that's for sure. Lethal Tempo felt so clunky because you had to wait a second and a half before you could start firing away at people. It's more consistent now. I personally think this was a fantastic change. Aftershock comes next, and it's the best designed tank rune of the 3 resolve keystones. It's a perfect choice for any tank champion that just wants to go in. The armor and magic resist bonuses in tandem with your own durability make it so you can withstand massive amounts of damage before going down, and with the new mythic item Even Shroud, you can grant your teammates bonus damage. On a side note, I'm actually kinda sad they made it a tank exclusive. It was an amazing rune on champions like Lysandra and Vi, a dive heavy mage and fighter respectively. I know the reason they did it was because they didn't want it to be too rampant like Conqueror, but at the same time I don't think it would have been like that because it only works on hard crowd control, so I didn't see any problem with it being that way. Even so, it's a solid rune for champions that want to go in, giving them just enough durability so they don't get one-shotted immediately. So, we've had 1 Precision, Domination, and Resolve keystone in A tier. Let's wrap it up with Sorcery's Phase Rush. This one might be a bit controversial. I know a lot of people consider this rune to remove counterplay for certain matchups. I disagree. Sure, when you're playing Nasus or Darius and you run into someone with Phase Rush, it practically makes them impossible to catch up to, but it's not without drawbacks. For one, the rune gives you no extra damage, and believe me, Arcane Common, Conqueror, Press the Attack, Electrocute and stuff, they do a lot over the course of a match. Moreover, it has a long cooldown early game. Obviously, in the late game, Phase Rush champs get one-shotted if you dive on them, so it doesn't matter. But in the laning phase, it takes 30 seconds to come back online, so if they recklessly burn Phase Rush trying to attack you, you can punish them accordingly. I'd argue after they tone down the movement speed, it's a fairly balanced rune. Given how slow a lot of mages are, I think it's fair privilege to allow them a choice between more damage or mobility. And now we arrive at the S tier. 2 runes left by process of elimination. I decided to put these 2 in S tier since, just like the mythic items, these keystones completely change how both you and they have to approach the game, but not in such a way that it gives a significant advantage or disadvantage to either side. Let's begin with Predator. Ever since it got buffed in patch 11.18, I've been seeing it pop up from time to time on a lot of champions with strong but predictable engages like Galio, Annie, Gragas, even Kennen sometimes. Having a 60% movement speed buff for up to 10 seconds means you can charge from one end of the map to the other or rush towards people without necessarily needing flash. If the enemy team has anyone with Predator, you have to be far more careful with how to engage fights, because normally the easiest way to deal with Annie is by spacing out of her range and praying she doesn't have flash. With this keystone, she can run right up to you and drop Tibbers from a far greater distance than you can react to. I put Hextech Rocket Bell in S tier for more or less the same reason. It makes the champion's playstyle more accessible without necessarily screwing over all chances of counterplay. It's just a really fun rune overall. I honestly wish there were more runes with actives instead of passives. Glacial Augment's rework was pretty fantastic too. It was rarely used in the past because it was too specific. You had to build certain items just to use it, but now it applies on any hard crowd control, so you can get them just by playing your champion. In fact, this might be a hot take, but I think Rel with Glacial Augment would be pretty insane. I haven't tested it, so don't quote me on it, but anyways, there's also another component where any targets affected by the icy zones deal 15% less damage to your teammates, making it so you can still get some defensive value out of it. If Morgana roots a diver or a skirmisher, not only are they stuck in place, but they're going to be heavily slowed and debuffed, which can mitigate a ton of pressure. I love it. Lethal Tempo and Glacial Augment were both some of the least frequently used runes in the game. Now with these changes, we might be able to see more usage out of them. Okay, we made it. God, these ranking videos are so much work. I want to repeat that this is purely my opinion, so if you disagree with me, please remember that these types of videos are all in good fun. How you see something hinges on perspective. You might think Predator is a super annoying rune because you're not used to Fiddlesticks or Annie being that fast. But on the flip side, it opens up new pathways and opportunities for those champions that might make them feel more satisfying to play. On the other hand, if you're someone who doesn't like to take too many risks, First Strike or Grasp of the Undying might be amazing runes to you, while I think they're pretty sucky because they don't really serve the purpose they were intended for. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like, subscribe to the channel, and check out my second channel if you're interested in non-League of Legends discussion. Apart from that, feel free to follow me on Twitter, join my Discord server, and check out my previous ranking videos if you haven't yet. But until next time, thank you all so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.